Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first quarterly meeting for 2020 for the NG911 GIS user group. I have the chat window up, so if anyone either can't see my screen or has a question as we're presenting or anything at all, just feel free to send me a chat. I'm just going to give everyone, I got a few more people joining here, so I'm just going to wait maybe about 30 seconds to get things started. Okay, looks like a few more have joined us, so we're going to get started. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Our agenda for today is kind of our usual standard agenda items. We'll go through a couple just quick project update items regarding what's going on with Kansas Next Gen 911. And then I'll hand it off to Sherry Massey, who will give us an update on the GeoMSAG and geospatial call routing. And then she'll hand it off to Kristen Jordan Koenig, who will give us a Next Gen 911 toolbox update. And then we'll wrap up with some events and outreach coming up and then take any additional questions you have. So again, for those that just joined us, feel free to type anything in the chat window if you either are having issues with seeing my screen or if you have questions as we're going through the presentation. Okay. All right, so as far as update items, really a couple minor things first. I always have to throw in my reminder that the quarterly deadline for this quarter is March 31st. And what I traditionally do is I'll wait until about 2 weeks before the deadline before I send out my email reminder. So the only people that get my email reminders are the ones that have not submitted data for that quarter. So if you don't want that pesky email from Eileen, then just submit your data before about 2 weeks for the quarterly deadline and you won't get it. But if you have an issue where you can't submit it before then, that's fine. I just like to send out reminders. And we also appreciate anytime if you run into an issue where you're not going to be able to meet that quarterly deadline, which we know life happens and software malfunctions and data issues happen, if you would just let myself or Sherry Massey know, so we can just make a note that your submission will be late just for our totals, because we do present to the 911 Coordinating Council at their meetings throughout the year, kind of our participation status and things going on for GIS. So that's really helpful to have an update in case someone is wanting to submit but just going to be late for some reason. So just as long as we communicate, all is good. Just a few things about the Next Gen 911 imagery. I've had a couple questions about kind of back to the licensing terms for the 2018 imagery and who to share with, who can have it, how they can use it, things like that. So if you're ever in doubt and someone is asking you to give them the 2018 imagery, then just send those requests to DASC. That way we can make sure they qualify under the licensing agreement. And, you know, pretty much everyone does. So if you remember, the licensing agreement is regions, institutions, local governments, state governments, federal governments, anyone doing a project on behalf of one of those entities. So really the main thing is making sure they work for one of those organizations or they're doing work on behalf of one of those organizations. So just send those requests to DASC, and even if they're not sure how to fill out those requests, again, just send those to us and we can take care of those for you. Of course, the last acquisition, the 2014-15 circa imagery, is available for download on the DASC website. And we are also getting to the point, believe it or not, that we're looking at our plans for an imagery refresh. So that's the next task for the Next Gen 911 GIS committee. The idea is to refresh the imagery about every 3 years. So we'll be starting to look at kind of what those requirements are that we're looking for, the funding available. So that's why I had to sneak in that bullet about how we're always looking for funding partners. On this last acquisition, we got additional funding that helped pay for the imagery from the Kansas Department of Revenue and the Kansas Department of Transportation. So that was really helpful to kind of keep the cost down. Since we know that this imagery is so widespread in its use that it's, you know, not only used by the dispatchers, but it's used by our GIS professionals and appraisers, and the more public stuff I know is used by utility companies and, you know, state agencies, you name it. So, so if you ever hear of anyone that's like, oh, we love the statewide imagery and how do we get more involved or anything? Well, then by all means, send those people our way too, because we're happy to have some funding participants. So more info on that as we kind of design how we're going to approach our new acquisition and then the timing of that and everything. So, gosh, we're already on that. The refresh, then we would try to be flown in the winter of 2021. So it's really time to start looking at that and determine our timeline for all that. So more news on that coming soon. Okay, so the big update I wanted to talk about today is, of course, the mapping software update for our call handlers. Been kind of mentioning this throughout the last few quarterly meetings, how we've helped evaluate, and then the Coordinating Council selected the replacement of the Vesta Locate software, which is currently being used by the dispatchers. We're moving to a product called Radius Plus, which is created by Rapid Deploy. It is a cloud-based mapping software. So when the AT&T Tiger team goes to install this at the PSAPs, they literally will be installing a Chrome browser and I think a new like mini machine. They'll be reusing a monitor they have. So it's not some major installation. It's all cloud-based. And Dask, as well as Sherry, we've been very involved in this process, designing the services to support this new architecture, making sure that we use the data that you all submit. So we have our Kansas authoritative data that's being pulled into Radius Plus for our call handlers. So been a lot of work. I got another slide to kind of talk about the data behind the scenes, but we're on kind of weekly calls with Rapid Deploy. We've done a lot of testing. There's just all sorts of behind the scenes things that we've been doing. So we're finally getting to the point where they're putting together a deployment schedule. As of now, and they always say dates are subject to change, but as of right now, the statewide installation for Radius Plus will start next week, starting with our usual pilot counties, Reno and Dickinson. I think it is installed there for a good couple weeks before we move on in March to some other sites. So Lori Alexander, as well as AT&T, is contacting the PSAPs and letting them know the installation date for Radius Plus, as well as training opportunities for Radius Plus, and some other installations for the infrastructure going on as well. So there's really a lot of things going on to constantly update the infrastructure to support Next Gen 911. And Sherry will talk a little bit more about the GeoMSAG and geospatial call routing, some things coming along in that arena as well. So the nice thing is that since you submit your data to us and we create these services, we're able to again put together a consistent map appearance that all of our dispatchers across the state are using. And that's kind of a win-win because it's familiar. So if anyone ever works as backup or overflow calls go to another PSAP, or a PSAP needs to call in extra help or anything, everyone's going to be familiar with the layout, design, and the appearance of the map. So really nice to have that across the state and then to have the seamless data statewide. So this slide I kind of want to pause on a little bit. It's got a lot of words on it, but we joke we might be up to, this could be like version 032 of the configuration put together for Radius Plus. We learned a lot through this process. There was just different system requirements with Radius Plus, as well as things we wanted to consider behind the scenes, like what's the best frequency for maintaining the data? How is it better to package the data for maintenance? How should the symbology look for all this data? What should we package together versus what should we host separately? How should it be ordered and configured? And just through testing with Rapid Deploy and figuring out what works and doesn't work, we finally came up with this configuration. So the first column talks about, we created a web map, if you guys are familiar with that. And that is considered the base map in Radius Plus. So this is the default settings for everyone on Radius Plus. And in that base map, it contains everything listed in that column. So the idea is this base map, we thought was this is all the essential information that our dispatchers will need always turned on. You know, this is information that we didn't think anyone would necessarily want to turn off, but everything, just like in a project or, you know, any GIS person, when they set up symbology and labeling, everything's controlled based on your zoom levels and panning and different things like that. So we played a lot with symbology on the appearance, how it looks, you know, when imagery turns on, once you zoom into a certain scale, it turns off when you zoom out, you know, the labeling, different things like that. So I guess kind of a big thing is this will include the new imagery, which is fantastic because the image service is being pulled into the web map to support Radius Plus. And then also we pulled in the KDOT highway symbols and the KDOT service for railroads and crossings into the web map as well, because we heard repeatedly that dispatchers really wanted to see that railroad information, so that KDOT, since they had a nice service put together that we could just kind of group into this setting, we grabbed that in there as well. So that's kind of the first thing. The base map is one of those things that either everything's turned on or off. So it will always be the default settings for the call handlers. So the second column are the different individual map services we put together. So we started thinking, okay, is there anything that we would want, the dispatchers might want to turn off and on? So since it is the hosted solution, we thought, well, we could put the non-hosted data in a separate category so that that can be turned off and on depending on if it's being used or not, or just have more control over it. As well as now in the dispatch, they'll have statewide parcel boundaries. Up to this point, we've only had parcels included that have been submitted as part of the NextGen 911 data. And since we're able to put this in these protected services, it just made sense to go ahead and put out the statewide parcel property boundaries for our dispatchers. So that's something they also can turn on and off. And then as well as the KDOT highway mile markers. So, and that was another thing we heard from a lot of call handlers, like, man, I really wish to have better symbology or something for the mile markers. So we also pulled in the Kansas Department of Transportation, their map service for that particular feature. And then the final thing we put together was the geocoding service. So Rapid Deploy, their default geocoder is using commercial products like Google or TomTom, and it kind of cascades through those different commercial products. But we determined that, of course, we wouldn't use our authoritative data, so we put together our own geocoding location service that cascades through those items there on the third column, so that, and through lots of testing, it seems to work great. So the idea is that it's always going to hit our Kansas geocoder first because our data is the best. So hits our Kansas data first, and if for some reason it can't find a match in that, it still will then cascade onto the commercial options as well. So it's kind of a nice backup system that we should have it in there, but in case someone were to give a address that didn't make sense or something that just couldn't be located, they still could cascade to other options to try to locate that. So we kind of got, in a way, you know, multiple cascading options for geocoding. So I know that's a lot to take in, but it's been an interesting process going through designing this. Of course, I have to give lots of credit to Kristen at DASK as well as Sherry Massey with dealing with my constant, what's this look like? Can we turn this on? What if we group this together? What if we change it this way? So it's been a fun process of figuring out the best way to do this, and I'm real happy with how this turned out. So that's kind of the data as it's packaged. So what's it gonna look like? So I've got a couple slides on that. So this is a little snapshot of what the environment looks like for Radius Plus. As you can see, it's a much more modern environment. I should have put a snapshot of Vesta Locate in here to remind you all, but Vesta Locate's been out of date and it's been end of life for a couple of years now. So the nice thing about Radius Plus is we're moving to a much more modern user interface, easy navigation tools on the right-hand side of the screen there. This is just, so every time a user logs in, depending on what PSAP they're in, it will be centered on their county. And so I just zoomed in a little bit in Dickinson so you could see the emergency services and law and fire boundaries coming up and labels, and then the mile markers, those big green symbols are the mile markers for the highways. And then if we drill in a little further, this is another example. Once the imagery turns on and then you see parcel boundaries, I didn't want to zoom in so close that we actually saw parcel. You will see owner names if you zoom in any further, but I didn't want to display those on a public presentation. So you get the idea that as you zoom in, just like with any project, you start seeing more information. So you see the address points, the parcel boundaries, and then you also can see the railroad, and these are the railroad crossing markers. And then, you know, whatever additional information is available at different scales. So really did a lot of playing with this to make it look nice. And really, for the most part, dispatchers are going to be looking at down to the property level or at county-wide, you know, so we wanted to make it, if they did pan around or zoom in and out, they'd have some more information. I have one more zoom level. I just had to zoom in on the city of Abilene's airport with that one airplane. I'm gonna keep Sherry muted so she can't give me a hard time about that, but I thought it was kind of funny. So the idea then is that you keep zooming in, you have your labels, you have your address point, which again is right on the structure, your parcel boundary, which is the white line, the name of the property owner and different things. So really it should, just by symbology, instead of them having to click on things, it should label and show them a lot of information about the call without having to really do much with the map. So we're really excited about this new mapping software. Like I said, it starts installation next week at Dickinson and Reno, and then it's a phased installation across the state. So I think they're scheduled through July until we get the entire state covered. So so coming soon to your PSAP, if you're on the hosted solution, your dispatchers will start having this new software to use. So, okay, so that is kind of my update, project update. So I'm going to hand it off to Sherry, but let me find Sherry to unmute you real quick. Okay, Sherry, can we hear you?
All right.
Okay.
So I'm doing an update on GeoMSAG and geospatial call routing, and for the last several of these, I've really focused pretty heavily on GeoMSAG stuff. This time it is going to be all about geospatial, so if you'll go to the next slide. We have two quick news items. First, as of right now, all PSAPs that are on the hosted solution have been converted to GeoMSAGs. And I say as of right now because literally Graham County, which was the last one we had to do, went live on a GeoMSAG a couple of hours ago. We got notified that that conversion was complete. So it's good news, and things have been rolling relatively smoothly with that. The only pieces of information that I would pass along to you are that there is to give you a reminder that there is a delay between when you submit the data to us and when it shows up in the MSAG. There haven't been too many hiccups with that. Most of the phone companies are at least relatively comfortable with it. But if you do run into any issues or you believe something should have been updated and wasn't, you can let me know. The other thing is that if you happen to know that your area is planning a readdressing project, like say one of the cities is going to address outside of its boundaries as an area of influence, or that was done in the past and somebody has decided to change it back to the rural county naming scheme and numbering scheme. If you have a big project like that that's going to be several roads and potentially several ranges of change, please contact me, because just submitting that through the GIS data may end up causing some heartburn if AT&T and Entrado don't know that it's coming. Doesn't mean that it can't be fixed, doesn't mean that we can't deal with it, but there's a few steps in the process that they're going to have to get comfortable with. This shouldn't matter for single address changes or even a single street, but if you've got a big area, make sure that you let me know. And then, of course, the big news is that geospatial call routing is being implemented around the state, and that actually starts next week. As Eileen said, Rapid Deploy will be put out at Reno and at Dickinson, and geospatial call routing will actually has been piloted at Reno and will start at Dickinson and several other places next week. And I'm going to kind of go through the dates on that, but I wanted to talk through what this means for you and what the impact is GIS-wise and what you can anticipate from your PSAP as this process goes forward. So next slide, please. So let's talk about the impacts. First of all, once they are turned on to use what is called I3 call routing or geospatial call routing, the PSAPs will begin using your emergency service boundary layers instead of the ESN numbers and the English language translations. That means that your PSAP boundary layer will be used to route calls to your PSAP instead of the ESNs that are in the database. And what they will see on the screen is whatever is in the display field of your law, fire, and EMS layers. So we do have to still maintain ESNs because they are the backup system if this more advanced system fails. But the idea here is that your GIS data is the engine in the background of the system. So as a quick reminder, we've talked about this a couple of times, but that ESB display field has a reduced character limit for this software. The NINA standard is 60 characters, but the phone software can only display the first 32 characters. The toolbox will notify you about this. It's not an error because you haven't done anything wrong in the submission, but we have tested it with AT&T, and what will happen is that it'll just truncate to the first 32 characters. So if you say, you know, I don't know, like the Abilene Police Department, and it happens to truncate the back end, of course that's not long enough, but you get the idea. That might not matter so much, but if you put Police Department - Abilene and it truncated the back end, that might matter quite a lot. So if you don't feel like you can restrain to the 32 characters, you should think about what those first 32 are and make sure they're sensible. Now, before this can be displayed for people, as we discussed in the email and in communications that have gone out, you have to complete the alignment or aligning all of your emergency service boundary data to fill with no gaps and no overlaps the authoritative boundary we provided back to you. All of this has to do, this alignment requirement has to do with a requirement for the company we submit data to. It's a function of their software, and we struggled quite a bit trying to find ways to move around it, so we didn't have to force this alignment on everyone, but we just were not successful. So I want to make sure if anybody on the call today has any questions about how to complete the alignment, about the tools, anything like that, please go ahead and put the questions. Eileen, the chat box is probably the best way. Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree. I've got the chat box open, so either if you have a question you want to type out, or if you want me to unmute you to ask the question, if you just put it in the chat box, then I'll respond.
And I just want to make sure that you guys know that you can communicate with us if you have any questions or anything that you'd like to go over with that process, because it is going to be one that needs to be completed, and the pressure to do so will be building. So while we're kind of waiting on that, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. This is where we are at right now. So the green counties are complete with the alignment process. The yellow counties have not completed the alignment process, and they have I3 pending, meaning that their dispatchers are about to see the data, or within the next couple of months at a maximum are going to about to see the data from the emergency service boundary layers, and they won't see yours. They will see the stand-in data that we created, which basically just says see local map data. If it comes up on the screen, a 911 call happens somewhere in your county and the emergency service boundaries have not been provided, then a message is going to come up that says law, see local map data, fire, see local map data, EMS, see local map data, because we're not displaying anything more detailed than that until we get your corrected geometry. For the counties in white, they have also not submitted, but we don't know when or how they're going to be going to I-3. And then the counties in gray are with the MARC region or going with the MARC region, and the alignment that happens between the MARC region and the rest of the state of Kansas will happen as a separate process. So if you'll go ahead and pop over to the next slide, I'll give you guys an idea of what your time frames are.
Before we do that, Sherry, we got a question.
Mm-hmm.
There's a question about bordering center lines. It says, it is my understanding that we can now mark center lines as exceptions that cross the authoritative boundary or completely outside of it. Do we foresee this becoming an issue in the future if those are indeed marked as exceptions instead of fixed to the boundary?
I guess the best way to answer that is not for this purpose. We have discussed this really thoroughly with the people at AT&T and at Entrado about the requirements, not just today, but going forward and what we anticipate. Unless you're on a border with another state or a border with another region, that boundary is going to be just fine as long as it is close enough that any geocoding that happens off of that center line would still go into the right county's boundary. And that geocoding is set at 30 feet as an offset. So if you're 1 foot out, 2 foot out, 5 feet out, 10 feet out, it's still going to offset into the proper county on either side. So the I-3, the transition to I-3 is actually going to progress a little bit faster than rapid deploy. It will begin, like I said, next week. And if you look on this, I've got one more slide, but we'll give you guys a couple of minutes on this one to look through and see who's where. It will begin next week with the first kind of group in the list for February, and the order is the order in which people are going to go live through the course of February, through the course of March, that kind of thing. The dates are not set in stone. A few of them are, maybe for the next week or two, but after that, things get a little fluid. So this is your order and your expectation of month, but not a guarantee of day. They are going very quickly, though, as you can see. So Eileen talked about the anticipation that they're going to be finished by July. They actually expect that towards the late part of March, rapid deploy and I-3 will be happening at the same time. So they're going to kind of catch up those places that go live with I-3 in February. They're going to catch them up with rapid deploy once that goes. And then in June, for example, Rollins, Cheyenne, Sherman, Wallace will get I-3 and rapid deploy at the same time or within a day of each other. So there's going to be a lot of activity going on, and AT&T is really pulling out the stops and bringing in a lot of people attempting to kind of catch up. If you'll recall, we've been talking about this for some time, maybe a little longer than anybody thought, and that's because of some software delays that had happened and a couple of errors in the software that they didn't want to deploy it until they were fixed. And that means that they're a little bit behind where they wanted to be, and they're going to try to make it up with this implementation schedule. So by the middle of July, they anticipate being complete with all 94 counties on the hosted solution, which is a really fast schedule. If you are, you see your county, if you do not have the ESB alignment completed before your county shows up in this list, then like I said, what they're going to see on the screen when 911 calls come in is not the recommended police, fire, or EMS. They are going to get less information with I-3 than they got before, because all they're going to see is check local map data until your emergency service boundaries are available to them to display the proper information. So this should give everybody kind of an idea of your time frame. Are there any other questions? And if you don't think of any now, you think of some later, you're of course welcome to give me a call or drop me an email. I'll be more than happy to help however I can.
At this time, we don't have any other questions in the chat window, but I'll keep an eye on it. So if anyone else comes up with a question before we're done with the webinar, we'll certainly can circle back and answer
Sounds
those.
good.
All right, thank you so much, Sherry. Okay, and I'm unmuting Kristen. Okay, now Kristen will talk about the toolbox.
Okay, hello everybody. I think we can go to the next slide. So we have a new toolbox version as of January 2020. That came out a few weeks ago, so hopefully everybody has had a chance to download that. There weren't many updates for the core toolbox itself, you know, the NG911 validation checks and things like that. Most of the updates were for the ESB adjustment tools. The biggest change that we did was how that the ESB test looks now for a tolerance to the authoritative boundary that we sent out. So instead of looking for a precise, exact vertex to vertex must be perfect thing, we're going for a tolerance now. We found out that because Esri is Esri, when you're doing the ESB adjustment process, it can add in some additional vertexes, and that doesn't change the fact that you're still working with the same boundary, but it does change the fact that all the vertexes are not identical between what you worked with and the original authoritative boundary that we sent out. That's why we're going for the tolerance instead. I picked some tolerance numbers at random and found out that one of them needs to be a little bit bigger, and that just happened like this week. So if you have done the ESB adjustment and your stuff is still not working, let me know and I'll send you the new copy that has an expanded tolerance. The expanded tolerance is live in the portal, so that is an expanded tolerance that's available. Mostly in the new version in January 2020, there were a lot of bug fixes with the ESB adjustments. So hopefully things are operating more smoothly. But as always, if you run across anything weird, just let me know. So let's go to the next slide and we'll talk about those tools. With the ESB adjustments and the new ESB toolbox, things are generally going pretty well so far. The trickiest thing is, and I have zero control over this, I cannot code around it. One of the Esri tools that we use absolutely hates spaces in path names. So whenever you are doing your ESB adjustment, put your working geodatabase in a folder that does not have any spaces in it. So if you're used to working, you know, with a series of folder names and some of them have spaces in it, take the spaces out or put your working geodatabase in like ctemp or something. That will make it go much better. I don't know why this issue exists. I cannot work around it in the code. It is what it is. Don't include any spaces in your folder names. I will say it's probably best to get your edits done sooner than later, if possible. From what I understand from my working with this and creating videos and working with Ricky at Dickinson County and the other data maintainers who have done this so far, I mean, it takes work, but it's not a significant pain in the neck. It just takes time, but it's not completely ridiculously awful. At least that's what we're hoping. If you found differently, I suppose you could send me a nasty gram, but I really hope you don't. So yeah, just probably best to get those edits done sooner rather than later, especially if your PSAP is going on to all the fancy words that Sherry talked about earlier. And what's happening after you submit your data that is adjusted, we're finding that there are some topology bordering issues. And Intrado, which is the company that takes the data after we have it, their system is still set to be extremely picky, and it rejects the data if they find even one vertex that is out of place or one vertex, you know, in your boundary that is not in your neighbor's boundary. So we have to do some manual topology editing here in-house now. It's not the end of the world, but this does slow the process down for like urgent edits. So just so you know, that's happening. And fortunately, we got those topology edits done with everybody that's submitted so far. And well, with one exception, but we're working that out. And the ESB data has been accepted into Intrado, which took us a while. That was a project. But things are moving forward pretty well. And I think that should be good. Let's see, Sherry or Eileen, anything to add on that?
Let's see, let me unmute Sherry. Not that I can think of. I'm just happy it's not ridiculously awful.
Yeah, yeah.
That's reassuring. So Sherry unmuted you as well. Is there anything you want to add?
Just that I deeply appreciate all of the work Kristen has put into this, because Intrado is being very nearly impossible. And Kristen has risen to the challenge every time they've come up with another ridiculous hurdle for us to try to jump. So thank you.
Which I did reflect on KU's. They have you know, annual evaluations that are all self-done. So on the adaptability category, I did put myself as exceeds expectations for 2019. So yeah.
And I went ahead as your supervisor and agreed with that. So
yes. Thank you, Eileen.
Absolutely. It looks like we just got another question. It says, have all counties recently been provided the new authoritative boundary?
Yes, the new authoritative boundaries are included in the toolbox download. There's a folder in there, I believe, called data or something to that effect. I don't have it in front of me. And there's a file geodatabase in there with 2 layers, one of them in Kansas State Plain North and one of them in Kansas State Plain South. And so all the boundaries are in there. You don't have to think about that geodatabase at all. When you run the first tool in the ESB adjustment toolbox, it will import your particular authoritative boundary into your geodatabase and go from there. So the data exists. I mean, it's in there if you want to look at it, but you don't have to do anything with it. The tools will handle that for you.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, I think that's it for questions right now. So thank you very much, Kristen and Sherry. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so I wanted to jump back. I realized something, as I always do after I'm done talking, just another little quick thing about moving to Radius Plus is that the other exciting part of this is that we're moving away from, right now we have to process the data out to shape files that we literally have to manually transfer to an AT&T admin machine before we can update each individual template. So the update maintenance on this is all through services now. Hooray! It's really up to us to set that frequency. As of right now, with testing and how we have it kind of planned out, we're going to do those updates weekly. If we decide that those updates need to be more often, we can certainly increase that. But the great thing about that is it's services refresh, so there won't be any, you have to upload or get a notification from Eileen to say, hey, I've updated your template. You won't have to hit some sort of refresh thing. It's all in services in a browser that'll automatically refresh while you're using it. So that part's super exciting. So no more of those, your template's been update notifications from Eileen once you've been migrated over to this platform. So we'll keep an eye on that. Like I said, we landed on, let's go for once a week for updates, because that kind of matches with kind of our submission frequency from our users. But if we decide that we need to switch that up, we certainly will. So I forgot to mention that. Okay, then I think the last thing we have today is just events and outreach. So I just put gobs of stuff on this particular slide to talk about. So the first thing is just to always let you know that we are working with our surrounding states or close-ish surrounding states for Next Gen 911. So we had a meeting with Oklahoma and their Next Gen 911 group a few months ago, and they came back and had several questions about our Kansas Next Gen 911 toolbox. So they've sent several questions to Kristen, who's been great working with them about, they've really been taking that and adapting it for use in Oklahoma for their own data submissions and data validation. So that's been a really interesting collaboration. And then also we're getting ready to set up a meeting with our GIS colleagues working on Next Gen 911 with Arkansas as well. Sounds like a lot of things they're doing, they're kind of headed down the same path where we are. So they wanted to just kind of get together and talk GIS and how we did this and how we did it right and wrong and where they're going. So I think that's kind of exciting every time we talk to some of our surrounding states, because that'll do nothing but benefit us in the long run with data alignment and data standards and everything like that. So that's kind of ongoing. Also the conference that your 911 call handlers and your 911 managers go to is the Kansas Association of Public Safety Communications Officials Conference. That's twice a year. The spring conference is April 6th through 8th. Ken, Sherry, and I always attend that. We give our updates to the 911 Coordinating Council, as well as attend any sessions that Rapid Deploy would have, or anything if I need an update on the portal, or Sherry has an update on all the other things she does. So we're always pretty involved with that conference, and we'll be there. Another reminder is Magic 2020 is coming up, which is a great regional conference, end of April in Omaha. We do not have any confirmed sessions there yet because we have not submitted the sessions. So we're working on that. Sherry and I are kicking around the idea of submitting a couple sessions to talk about Kansas 911. So I hope to see you all at that conference. We're just getting the date set for the GIS Data Steward and Data Maintainer certification classes for this year. The classes will be held in Wichita, Hayes, and Topeka this year. And I'm going to unmute Sherry to make sure I have my dates right, but I believe we have May 20th set in Wichita, August 18th set for Topeka, and we're looking at sometime in June in Hayes. Is that right, Sherry?
That is correct. And Hayes is likely to be the first week of June. We just don't have a set date. We're still working with the venue to get that done. And then we'll also do a maintainer class pre-cam unless something unusual happens to keep that from getting set up.
Okay, great. So as usual, once we have a little closer to the date, we'll send out the information on how to get registered. I'll send an announcement, and we usually post that on the DASC website as well. So if you're just haven't heard anything and you're looking for an update, you can always check there to see if we have the registration link available there. And then finally, since I've got Sherry on the hook here, the National Emergency Number Association, which is the national standard for all this geospatial call routing and data models and everything we're moving to here. They have asked for the GIS data model work group. They've asked Sherry Massey to be a group leader, which she's always participated in NENA activities and committees, but I think they're very smart in asking her to actually be a group leader. So she will be keeping an eye on national standards and making sure we're staying in alignment. And Sherry, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Just that it's kind of interesting when they took a look at the data model and they took a look at all of the requirements that are kind of happening across standards everywhere in GIS, not just 911, but the fact that as people really become awake to the idea of GIS being so powerful, standards are starting to get written to say, hey, in order for you to exchange data, you need to do it in this way. And of course, everybody has a different idea of how that's going to happen. So what we're actually going to be looking at for the first run of this is taking a look at the alignment between that 911 data model and some of the others that are coming out of the federal government and other professional organizations. So it should be pretty interesting. And for those of you that might either have association with NENA or might occasionally get their emails and things, they'll be sending out a request for volunteers to actually be members of the work group and the more we have from Kansas, the better our voice gets heard. So I encourage anyone who hears about that and believes they might have the time and interest to sign up.
Excellent. Well, we're glad you're participating, and we'll be anxious to hear more about that committee as it takes off. Okay, so I think the final thing I have, I don't see any new questions in the chat at this time. So just a reminder that you can always go to the Kansas 911 Coordinating Council website, and then of course the DASC Initiatives website for updates to different things. Like I said, once we have the registration available for the certification classes, we'll have that out there once I have this recording done, and the slides for the presentation today, I'll get those posted. So feel free to check there. If you don't find it there, feel free to reach out to Sherry or Chris and I, depending on what your question is. And then also we kind of updated a few things on the GIS committee page on the DASC initiative side. So it's a little easier to contact your GIS Next Gen 911 GIS committee members if you're looking to see who's on the committee and maybe reach out to them. So feel free to poke around, see if there's any information you have on there. And there's also training videos and all sorts of good stuff out there. So with that, I'll see new questions. So thank you very much for joining us, and feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions after our webinar today, but I'll talk to you soon. I hope everyone stays warm and enjoys the snow. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.